it's Donna Balzer, and I'm here live again today with gardening answers and hopefully questions. So if you are online right now on Facebook and want to get a hold of me, you are more than welcome. And if you just want to sit back and listen and watch, yes, I've still got the green stickies on my wall. I have not finished putting together that course. Still got my gardener's gratitude journal. This morning, I surprised myself and I planted my onions and my leeks. Now, usually I wait, but those two things came in the mail. Early February is a great time to start onions and leeks because it's such a long season crop. So I wrote that down this morning. So what are you doing in your garden? I know it's freezing cold outside everywhere, but luckily we're in our homes with our Facebook and we can do things inside. I just have to say, if you haven't seen my other book, The No Guff Vegetable Gardening, that was a huge hit this weekend. I brought it along with me to CD Saturday and people really loved it. Anyway, that is that. That's what's happening today on Facebook Live. So come on down, say hello, tell me what you're up to. I'm getting ready right now to go to Grand Prairie. So if you're from Grand Prairie, I understand there's just a couple of spots left in that town for the Healthy Village Gardening Extravaganza, which is all weekend long, but I'm just going to be there for Saturday, so I'm flying out on Friday. So join us. We're going to do lots of hands-on things. I'm bringing some seeds that we can separate. We're going to talk about planning and designing your vegetable garden, and we're also going to get some real good hands-on experience with seeding your own microgreens. And if you haven't done that before, that could be lots of fun. So why not join me there? I am also I guess I promised earlier today that I would talk about how I'm heating my greenhouse, and I'm just curious what seeds people are growing. Here's some. I showed these last week. I need to get myself more organized, but these are some of the ones that have been arriving. These are the climbing phoenix nasturtiums. I'm very excited about those. So here we go. Facebook Live, February 4th, 2019. And Darlene's already here. Hello from Calgary, Darlene. Nice to see you on. And do you have any questions? Darlene's been a great follower, and you've also been promoting some of my things, and that's been really neat. So this is the big secret. I talked about it. I'll talk a bit more about it. I talked about it this morning when I previewed Facebook Live. This is what I'm doing to heat my greenhouse. So here's the problem. It's cold out, but the greenhouse, because it's got the cover and because it has, a little bit of warmth, just intrinsic and all the concrete and everything within the greenhouse, it doesn't get as cold as it would get if you were, just outside. So last year we tried this problem. The situation, we realized if we could warm up just the flower beds, so just the beds inside the greenhouse, then we would be able to start our potatoes early. And we did that in grow bags last year, and it was amazing. We loved it. But I didn't want to plant the potatoes right in the ground, because if you do that, well, they take several months, and then you can't be planting your tomatoes and other things. So we started the potatoes in the grow bags on top of the heating coil inside the greenhouse. So this is what we used to heat the floor. This roof and gutter de-icing cable you can buy, because if you're living almost anywhere in the prairies, you just get it at Canadian Tire or something like that, and you just simply put it in your gutters. But we don't have to do that here. But I instead tried burying it in my greenhouse, and then I realized, well, then I have to dig it up, or I might poke through it. So this time I just laid it on the top of the soil, and it brought the temperature up last year from about 40 Fahrenheit to 60. And again, I apologize because I have a Lee Valley Tools thermometer, and it only shows me Fahrenheit. It doesn't show me Celsius. So I'm not sure what 50 or 60 is, but right now it's 40. And most things except maybe kale and radish will not readily germinate in that temperature. And Sean's here. Hi, Sean. Thanks for your endorsement on the Calgary hippies. That was great, the gardening hippies. And I guess she knows Darlene as well. So that's great. So we can start a conversation going and find out. I know Darlene was putting together a list of the tomatoes she's growing. So now I'm wondering, Sean, what type of tomatoes you're growing. I think I told Darlene I was growing Juliet's, which I've grown for several years. I almost ordered Jasper. Jasper was one that was definitely the earliest one to bloom for me. It's a small cherry tomato, and they were first out of the track. but I noticed the seeds were $8.95. So I put them on my list. I crossed them off my list. So I've got quite a few other things going. So anyway, I just wanted to finish up with that little comment about the roof gutter de-icing. And I've got that in place in my greenhouse on my soil, because my big plan is that those will get buried, the potatoes will be on top. When I take the potatoes out in about a month, I don't actually put them outside. It's still too cold, but I'll put them on the floor of the greenhouse, because by then they've started to grow. And my extra potatoes, I think I showed them last week, are just lined up along the windowsill. But I want things to start to grow, and then I can use that nicely warmed soil to plant other things. So I'm going to give myself about a month, and probably next week I'll start my tomatoes inside. So that'll happen next week. This week I started onions and I started leeks. So if you started something this week, tell me what you're starting or just about to start. For instance, Sean, you have a greenhouse. You might have started something already. I don't know. It is a bit early, but for onions, when do you normally start your onions? I know everyone I know that's serious about getting big onions gets them started soon. So that is what we're up to. And Margot's back. I see Margot's on. So say hi and we'll jump in. Remember, there's a time delay here. So if you think, why isn't Donna answering my question? Sometimes it's the time delay. So just this weekend, I went out on a really interesting greenhouse garden consultation, and I was helping Julie, who had a greenhouse. It was a hoop house that was already built on her property, and she had just soil on the ground, no beds. She wanted to build beds, and we started talking about all the possibilities of things that she could put in there and how deep the bed should be. We decided she should have very deep beds. She actually had decided that already, 16 inches deep, which is perfect in a greenhouse. If you're trying to deal with little boards that are 4 feet deep, or maybe 6 or 4 inches or 6 inches, it's just not deep enough. And you might end up finding out that your roots are going to go much further than that. So Julie's going to have 16-inch deep beds, which is what I've got here. And I think it'll work out really fantastic. Also, I asked her if she wanted to isolate an area that she could cover separately, which is what some growers do. I know Bob does this in Santa. She covers with fabric within the greenhouse. So then you get that double layer, and that allows you to grow things that are maybe a little milder. And I see Kristen's here too. Hi. Oh, she's already started her onions. Kristen, are you growing asparagus indoors already? I have a big patch outside, so I didn't even remember that it's time to start asparagus. And parsley. Have you had good luck with parsley? I find parsley takes sometimes 2 weeks to germinate, so it's a crazy one. Oh, and Sean's just gotten back to us. Hers were sungold, cherry falls, gold medal, and some container paste for sure. So that's really exciting. So she's also starting her onions. So February, I should have just said, February is not the month for lovers. It's the month for criers. So this is the month that we need to put our onions in the ground. And if you're growing leeks, tell me what kind you're growing. I had a really interesting situation where I let my leeks go to seed because I left them in the ground for a second year. And I thought, I've only got the one kind of leek, so these are going to come true. Well, in fact, what I got from them was not true. They had somehow crossed with onions, and the leeks are so closely related to onions that the seeds I got the year after were leek onions. I don't know what to call them, but they were kind of bulbing, but they weren't long and slim like most leeks are. So I was just going to leave it. And then of course I forgot that one grow bag. I grow a lot in grow bags, and I forgot that outside. And that grow bag sprouted its own little seedlings. And I saw them coming up last year, but I just thought I'm going to leave that because it looks to me like they're leeks and I don't really care. And I noticed just recently in the last month when I was out looking at them that they're actually leeks. So in this climate, I'm right now on the West Coast. In this climate, those will probably come back and they look like real leeks this time. So I'm excited about that. So Sean, I have also grown sungold, just getting back to your tomatoes, and I love them because they're so sweet, and I find they always crack. If you've got a secret to stop your tomatoes from cracking, specifically sungold, because they're an open pollinated variety, so they're an older variety, and they don't seem to have that tough skin. Maybe you're actually adding extra calcium. I'd be interested to know. And tomatoes later this month. See, typically I didn't used to start tomatoes till mid-March, but I'm definitely getting going. Darlene says she has rosemary started last August, kale, pak choi, lettuce, parsley, thyme, basil, violas. That is amazing. That is a lot of stuff, Darlene. I assume you're growing under grow lights because you're writing us from Calgary. So that's pretty neat. I just had a neighbor over who was helping us design. We're putting in a little house in the back corner. It's called a garden suite, I guess. It's going to be sweet, and it's going to be in our garden. So I think that'll be fun. And we're going to have just bigger space because we just had the student last week. I had Heather, who I loved. Shout out to Heather. And I've got some more students coming later, or one in early March and one in late March. And the trouble is, there's just a lot of us here underfoot. It's a small house. So we're going to build a little house. We're excited about that. It's going to be something that we can have kids stay in or maybe rent out on Airbnb. Right. So Darlene's also going to be starting her tomatoes at the end of February. So I'm thinking, I'm on a warmer climate. I'm thinking mid-February, but good to see you and Sean are starting later in the season. Wow. Lots of questions by Bonnie Ricks. Stay warm next week. What's happening next week? Bonnie, it's already cold here this week. Kristen's saying, oh my, sungold and gold nugget are both bad for cracking. Good, so it's not just me. I found that they split. They look perfect. You go in and get your bowl. You come out. It's almost like they see you coming and they split while you're walking out. So yeah, I'm kind of off that this year, and I've got a big list. I should have posted my whole list. I'll do that soon. I have quite a few new postings up because I've been growing so many microgreens and people have been asking me about that. I was just at the CD Saturday this weekend in Qualicum, and I had a table there and sold a ton of stuff, including my Oregon spring giant peas, which literally are giants. They must be like almost 8 inches long, and they're sold as snow peas, but if you forget to pick them, you can let them get bigger, and they puff right out, and they're more like sugar snap peas, and those are amazing. So I've been using those for my inside, for my microgreens, but I like them so much that I used to just grow generic kinds of seeds for microgreens, for pea greens, and now last year I started by growing just the Oregon giant, and they are amazing because I can start to transplant those out. As my microgreens are finished, as I've harvested them all, I can plant them outside. And when I do that, I end up with a really early crop. I think it was early June last week that I was eating peas. Now, sometimes, you win and sometimes you lose. If you plant your peas out too early, well, they can be killed. But the thing is, they've already been harvested as microgreens. I harvest 3 or 4 times before I actually put them out there. So I'm not worried. It's not a loss. Oh, sun sugars. Okay, so if you're following along faster than me, Darlene has said that she grows sun sugar, which I assume is also a yellow type, and it didn't split at all. There's Paula. Paula, can you recommend a good book resource for growing in a greenhouse? The one I was given was more about commercial greenhouses. I've been asked at least 3 times to write a book on greenhouses, and I've never done it. It's tough. You know what I will show you? I've got it right here. I ordered this online, Paula. I've got to grab it. I ordered this online. It's from the 1930s. It's called The Amateur's Greenhouse. So there's some bad information in here. When it talks about chemicals, just ignore all that. But there's some really good information. Like I was noticing this book on page, because I was just looking at that, 274, they're talking about straw bale gardening. And a lot of people, even today in 2019, don't know about straw bale gardening. So this book is from the 1930s. It's called The Amateur's Greenhouse. I just ordered it online, and it's A.J. McSelf. So just like it sounds, MacSelf. And maybe I'll actually type that in as a response as well. So it's really pretty good because although they grow some things that you wouldn't want to grow, and like I say, there are a few mentions of chemicals. Actually, I think I got it online for about $3, and it's a really great book. Now, you have to remind us, Paula, I think you're growing mainly in pots in your greenhouse, and if you're using pots, what kind of pots do you prefer? There's the difference between the plastic pots, the fabric pots, and then some people in the greenhouse are growing just in soil. And I'm kind of doing both. So that's what we were talking about earlier. We were growing potatoes in fabric pots on my beds, and then I'll take those off. So yeah, I can't off the top of my head recommend anything other than the Amateur's Greenhouse. I really like it. It's got, even though it's quite old, it's got some good information in it. Oh, Grand Prairie looks bloody cold. That's what Bonnie's saying. So, Bonnie, are you from Grand Prairie? Am I going to see you this coming weekend? It is, my daughter lives in Edmonton. My son lives in Smithers. My son's pipes froze this weekend, and that's unusual for Smithers. Even though it's a 12-hour drive north of Vancouver, they're within 2 or 3 hours of the ocean, so they usually don't get that extreme cold. And their pipes burst, so I know I'm bracing for that. Sean has told me she's using fabric in the greenhouse on both beds. Of course you are, because we have to keep them growing. And I direct cool season crops because I live 25 minutes away, and I can drive back and forth to cover them from frost. It's a bit cooler out there than in the city. For tomatoes, I plant with Epsom salts and use soaker hoses on a timer in the dome. I don't have a big issue with cracking on sungold, so that's really great. So if you don't worry about cracking, if you haven't had cracking, I wonder what Sean's doing different. She's got the soaker hoses. Of course, you are in Red Deer and you have that great clay soil. I have to say I miss those clay soils. I like it that you mentioned Epsom salts. If people don't know what that is, Epsom salts are magnesium and sulfur crossed over. And lots of times in growing areas, there's a shortage of sulfur. And once it becomes available, so once you put the Epsom salts on the soil, the actual magnesium splits apart from the sulfur, and the magnesium attaches itself onto the clay particles and gets used by the plants or taken in by the microbes. The sulfur also gets used by the plants, but sometimes because it's an anion and it can't hang on as quickly, there aren't as many sites for negatively charged minerals, so sometimes the sulfur just runs away. But we know in gardens we often have a shortage in sulfur, especially on the prairies. So magnesium sulfate, which is also called Epsom salts, can be quite helpful. On the other hand, people that have clay soils, sometimes the clay soils get so tightly packed, and if you don't have enough calcium that's readily available, they'll stick to each other. And you've all seen clay soils that are sticky. I'm sure you have. So by adding a little bit of accessible calcium, maybe calcium sulfate instead of magnesium sulfate, it can separate out those clay layers and we can nicely flocculate our soils. So calcium sulfate is commonly called gypsum, and you can buy it at the stores prilled, and we put that into the soil to help with that stickiness in clay. But sometimes you need magnesium, sometimes you need clay. Studies have shown now that magnesium on clay soils can make them even stickier. So if you've already got tight or sticky soils, tight soils are the ones that you just can't get into, then maybe you don't want to use magnesium. But I assume that the Epsom salts that Sean's putting on are actually because it's in her greenhouse, which she has amended soil. So she probably has tons of compost and tons of organic matter. And that was the interesting thing this weekend when I was helping Julie. She had so much organic matter that, in fact, that's all she had. And she said she sometimes has to actually water in her greenhouse for 3 weeks. 3 weeks before the soil will get wet. So that happens when you have too much organic matter and not enough clay. So going forward, it seems almost sacrilegious, but it's something that I've read and really tried myself. Mixing a little bit of clay, actual clay from your garden, with water and pouring that onto your compost will help your compost have just that small amount of clay in it, which will help build your soils. And the clay itself can be quite attractive to those minerals, the anions. And keep talking about soils. Why do we keep getting off on that? Anyway, so Sean has a very great situation for her tomatoes and has not found hers splitting. Last year, Margot took a chance and started romaine lettuce indoors in late February. They were ready to put out in the raised beds really early, and we have covers to put over them, and they worked really well. Isn't that great? So people aren't thinking, I mean, it is February, and people aren't thinking about starting too much, but Margot is in just northeast of Calgary, so she was able to do it in late February. So start to get ready. Hopefully you've all gotten your seeds piled up. Oh, Bonnie's mom is Bev Rogerson, and she will be at the talk. And she works at Aerosmith Greenhouses. Oh, that's fantastic. So Bonnie's here on the island. That's funny. Usually it's the mums that have retired to the island, but Bonnie is here on the island, and her mom, Bev, is coming to my talk next Saturday. And I have known Bev since the 1970s. That's quite a while. Oh, gosh. And Bonnie won't be able to make Grand Prairie. Well, it's quite a long ways. You would have had to book that flight quite a while ago. Nancy Jenkins made it. Still cold outside and hope the snow has stopped. So good to see you, Nancy. So Paula, I've been using large pots on the ground on shelves and also growing cucumbers in hanging baskets. Oh, this is in Paula's greenhouse. She was telling us what she's doing. After seeing your greenhouse, I'd like to try raised beds in the greenhouse. Thank you for the book recommendation. Paula, what we did for raised beds, it was kind of unusual. And I was saying that to Julie this weekend too. She was going to use the 2x6s or 2x4s, but it only takes in a greenhouse situation 4 to 5 years, and those have completely broken down. So we actually got bricks. Maybe I'll post some photos of that later. We got bricks that are what they call capstones. So they put them on top of block walls, and they're quite big. They're 13 inches wide and about 3 inches thick. So my husband turned them on end and put them on top of wooden boards. The wooden boards he used are rough cut, so they're kind of rough, and they're long and straight. And the reason he used those was so that we could get it very level. And then we glued all with PL. I think it's called PL. I should have written that down. It's a special type of glue that you can glue cement things together. And we glued all of our blocks together because the idea is when that wood breaks down in 5 to 7 years, we're not going to have to worry about it because those bricks, which are cement, are glued together. And that just gives us that little bit of extra space so that we can grow right in the ground. And just having even a couple of beds in the ground, I think I was talking a few weeks ago about how I put did my soil test when I got my brand new sparkling soil delivered. That should have been amazing. But in fact, I got the world's worst soil test back. I felt like a flunky out of grade 5. It was just terrible. And that was new soil that I had bought. So I've been working on it ever since then. And I got my new award-winning soil test back this week. And one of the secrets is I've been adding quite a bit of biochar, and that hangs on to the nutrients. So sometimes you waste nutrients, you pour it in, you think you're doing a good job, and they just scatter away. So good for you, Paula. I think having a bed in your greenhouse, as Margot said, because in her greenhouse, she was able to start some things, especially undercover, by the end of February or early March, or sometimes you can start them indoors. And again, calcium is almost always the element in soil that makes plants more frost tolerant. So I think that's great. Darlene is going to be starting a Martino's Roman sweet orange. Oh, she's talking about tomatoes again. We're jumping back and forth, which is fabulous. Sunrise bumblebee. Darlene mentioned sunrise bumblebee, and I grew that last year. If there's anyone here that has not grown sunrise bumblebee, it's an open pollinated, so you can get it from a friend. But I also really love it because it's bigger than the sungold. It's kind of a red colored, but it has a really pretty yellow stripe on it. And it was really crunchy, and I really loved that sunrise bumblebee. And Juliet. Yes, I'm also growing Juliet. Really hoping to find a sweet, great prolific tumbler type tomato. I'm trying some new ones too that I haven't tried before because I've actually, for the first time ever, ordered special greenhouse varieties. I just got a few. They've just arrived. I haven't even looked them over. But the reason I've ordered those is because sometimes you don't get the same pollination in a greenhouse, and you have to go and, help the plants out with your paintbrush. So I'm trying a couple of indoor types. Nancy said something is nibbling my pothos. I keep it in the pot. So I bought for 3 in the same pot and in the tub. I wonder what could be eating a pothos at this time of year. If you've got a weevil that came in from outside somehow, because they really eat the ends of leaves. Is it like chipped out, or is it like the leaves are being scabbed away? It would be interesting to hear what kind of damage you're getting, Nancy. So let us know about that. And she put a stopper in the tub to see if something was coming up the plumbing. I don't know. I can't answer that. I can't check your plumbing from here. Margot says, no, I don't have a greenhouse. Margot didn't do it in a greenhouse? I planted my romaine in raised beds outdoors. So did you direct seed it? But my husband made some covers that work like a mini greenhouse. Oh, Margot, I would love to see a picture of that. We've done that as well with irrigation lines. We've just bent them over the edge of raised beds and then put our fabric on. And if you know the different fabrics, we used to call it all floating row cover or rime, and now most people, the type that's available is called agribon, and there's different weights, 19 and 50, and 50 is a winter weight. So I wonder if that's the kind of cover Margot used. I think that's really cool, Margot. And so you direct seeded your lettuce at the end of February. Not so strange though, because actually sometimes when you're out in your garden, if you think about it, some of those seeds fall by the wayside in the fall. You don't, cut them back. And both spinach and lettuce in my garden has done that, both in Calgary and here. So it's not such a surprise. If you put out as a small plant, sometimes they don't overwinter, but if you let things get seeded in the fall, or even as Margot said, as early as February, you can start things growing. So no more whining from those people that are planting on the long weekend in May. None of us, because we're all gardeners. We're not doing that. Wow. We've really had lots of chatter going on today. This has been really fun. Did I miss anybody? Let me know if I have. Looks like we're having a great discussion about onions. I think in summary, where lots of us are growing really interesting tomatoes. Margot, I need you to know that the Linzer Delicasse potato that we talked about last week, they're sold out of at Eagle Creek Farm. So if you haven't ordered your potatoes left, you'll be surprised that some of the really nice fingerling types are not available this year because they had a real drought. And Eagle Creek Farms is close to Bowden, which is north of Calgary, and they grow some really great organic potatoes that they ship right across the prairies and into BC. I get their potatoes every year. I love them, but they've run out of a lot of those early specialty fingerling potatoes like the Linzer Delicasse that Margot talked about last week. So I did manage to get some French fingerlings, although I still have quite a few in storage, and they're a good lasting potato for me. They haven't started to sprout yet or grow in any way, but I always order new ones because you never know with disease. And this year, I don't know if I mentioned it, I'm doing the big test in my fabric bags when I get my next helper, which will be in first week of March. We're going to put some soil in each grow bag, and then we're going to put some potatoes, the same kind, in each grow bag. And then some of them will have straw, some will have wood chips, and some will have weeds. Because some of my best potatoes grown in pots have just been top dressed with weeds. So literally every time I'm out weeding, because think about it, if you pull up a whole little seedling weed, you often get that soil. And the reason you've got the weeds is because you've got too much nitrogen. So you've got that green plant, you've got that soil, and you've got all that nutrient that's in there. So those were actually in the past my very best potatoes grown in weeds. But this year I'm going to do a 3-part trial so that I'm not just saying these things. I want people to see how it makes out. So good for you, Margot. Oh, Nancy's back. Oh, Nancy said there is straight across the leaves and they turn brown where the nibble has been. So maybe you don't actually have a bug. Maybe, Nancy, you have a bacterial leaf spot or something like that. Sometimes you see those little spots on your leaves. So I'm looking forward to seeing a leaf from you. Okay. Bonnie sent me a private message, but I don't know how to open private messages while I'm doing Facebook Live. So I'll look at that later. And Janine says, I'm not familiar with grow bags. Can you elaborate, please? Oh, I usually have so many of them. I'm going to have to, well, you know what? I'm just going to elaborate and we'll show and talk about those next week. Grow bags are made out of usually recycled pop bottles. And so there can be any size. I've got some that are 1 liter and 3 and 5 and 10. The best size for growing potatoes are either 10 liters or gallons, 10 gallons or 15 gallons. So they're quite big. And these were usually grown and used as tree and nursery pots. And they work so well because the plants can't circle the roots around. When they get to the edge, they dry out because it's a porous bag. And what that means is that they branch back a little bit. And then the potatoes or whatever plant I've grown, kale and strawberries in mine, mainly strawberries, they have really done well because they're never sitting. So that's what those are, Janine. I'll show one next time. Maybe we'll bring that on next week. Sean said, I really don't have the knowledge you have on soil amending. I mix soil like I bake, just kind of have an idea of what works, and it usually works out. Do you have a good book that you can recommend that isn't too sciencey, if that's a word, to help educate me on that? I have a really good book that I just love. Here it is, right here on my shelf. Sorry about that. I have to keep getting up and getting down. Take it out of the library. I wouldn't buy it right away. It's called The Intelligent Gardener. And Sean, it's a little bit sciencey, And if you follow up and you send away for your soil sample, you're going to find out like there's these really complicated charts. But thank goodness, Steve also gives us a recipe. And I have that recipe that I can turn into a PNG. Maybe I can do that and post that on my Facebook side. So that's what I've been using. I've decided that even though I have a science degree, it's too sciencey for me. So the book itself is very interesting, but the formulas to use once you find out what you've got on your soil test are quite complicated. So I've been using his general West Coast mix, and he's got a separate prairie mix. So I've got both of them. And what I had to do, because it's all in pints and quarts, I had to convert it, and I had to see what materials I could buy. Some are more available than others. So I've kind of changed it for Canadians because he's American. But what really struck me in this book, and if you didn't catch that the first time, it's The Intelligent Gardener by Steve Solomon. Steve actually was an organic farmer, and his teeth were falling out, and they were getting wiggly and falling out. And he was like, what's going on? And he realized he had been really low on nutrients. So then he dug in. So even though he had been an organic farmer, he found that he was really suffering. So what he found out was that you can raise lettuce. If you can picture this, imagine raising lettuce to 20% protein, because steak has 20% protein. So imagine getting lettuce, usually you don't even think of it as a protein. And that became a really helpful thing to have with my daughter, who's vegetarian. So we both got right involved in how to mineralize our soils. I would love to talk about that for hours. Sean, I'm hoping I'm going to see you when I'm speaking in Red Deer in mid-March. I hope that happens. I hope we can get together even. And maybe Margot can come up too. That would be fun. Okay, so just to make things clear, Margot says, I planted my romaine indoors under grow lights. Oh gosh, I've said that wrong then. And then I put the bedding plants outdoors in the raised beds under the covers. When it warms up, I can send you a picture. That sounds really great. And Paula said, I've had fun with winter sowing in 4-liter milk jugs. That's quite fun, isn't it? A lot of people have been doing that. And so far I've seeded cosmos, flax, native lupin, and lavaterra. We'll also try pansies, marigolds, and any other cold germinator. So that's fantastic. Well, Heather's here too, and Heather was with me all last week. Heather, you had the perfect week. It's snowing here now. We have tons of snow, so we're so happy you were here last week and able to help me. And Heather and I were talking intensely about The Intelligent Gardener, and I also have Gary Zimmer's books. So Sean, those would be great to start with. Let's go with that. And if you think it's a good idea, I can post the little recipe I can find a way to post that right here on the page. So if you like that. And look, we've used up our half hour. Any more questions? If not, I'll be posting this and we can keep the conversation going after I've shut down. And I really appreciate everyone joining me. And I'm glad everyone's getting things started. Just a recap, we're talking about onions this week. A couple weeks, we'll be starting our tomatoes. And Margot, the adventurous Margot, is talking about last year when she planted things outside at the end of February, little transplants. So that is really exciting. That's something that you don't read about. Paula's also doing it, but she's doing it in her 4-liter jugs. If you've got a greenhouse, it's like a giant 4-liter jug. You could be seeding things now. And the kinds of things in a greenhouse that maybe Paula could seed now are things like spinach, because spinach typically will come up as soon as it's ready to come up. And you might find out, Paula, that it's coming up in February. Okay, I've got to run. Thank you so much for joining me. This coming weekend, I'm in Grand Prairie. The weekend after that, I'm in Victoria, and somewhere else the weekend after that. So let's talk in person if we can. Otherwise, follow me online. If you sign up for my webpage, I'm sending out a newsletter. I think it's tomorrow. So sign up today if you're not already signed up, and you'll get the newsletter. All obviously new things. Talk to you soon.